Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this Achates live session on Thursday, the 11th of June. Today, we are going to be talking about building a fundraising culture. My name is Jacoba Bruneel, and I'm a consultant at Achates, and I'm joined today by my colleague Phoebe Walker, who's a senior consultant at Achates. We are a consultancy providing support to cultural organizations with fundraising, recruitment, strategy, organizational change planning, and impact evaluation. We take our name from Greek and Roman mythology. Achates was a close friend and loyal advisor to Aeneas, so we think our name quite neatly describes the relationship that we offer to our clients within the cultural sector. Achates Live was set up to really support the sector by bringing fundraisers and other arts professionals together to discuss key topics and also to enable you to help and support each other. Whilst we obviously acknowledge that Achates doesn't necessarily have all the answers, what we absolutely do have is an overview of the sector itself, and we are incredibly passionate about using this perspective and role in a supportive way. It's worth saying that all of the information shared in today's conversation is of course correct at the time of broadcast. Today's session, as I mentioned, will be focused on fundraising culture, and my colleague Phoebe will chair a discussion with our two experienced panelists. So I'm delighted to hand you over to her to welcome our guests who will be exploring this topic with us today.
Thank you, Jacoba, and a big welcome to everybody. So, building a fundraising culture, an organisation's holistic approach to its fundraising is a significant factor in that very work's effectiveness. Development teams and staff members may be highly skilled and well-oiled, but if they're operating in a silo, fundraising will inevitably come up against limitations and frustrations that hinder its impact, especially over the longer term. And this is equally true if you're a solo fundraiser or are responsible for your organisation's fundraising alongside a host of other responsibilities. As fundraisers, we've likely all had drilled into us the mantra that fundraising is the responsibility of everyone in an organisation, something to be considered in day-to-day interactions with stakeholders across every area of work, as much as it is in strategic planning and focused fundraising activity. We know, however, that as sound as this is in theory, the practical reality of embedding a shared vision can have its challenges, particularly when it comes to pushing back against received attitudes that reduce fundraising's purpose to a single financial bottom line. And this, of course, is particularly important when it comes to the relationship with your board, where a more active role in fundraising delivery is required than in any other aspect of your organisation's work. So with this in mind, I'd now like to introduce our two lovely panellists today who are going to talk us through their own experiences in building a fundraising culture in their respective organisations. So we're delighted to be joined by Julia Bird, Fundraising and Development Manager at Magic Me. Hi, Julia.
Hello. Thanks very much for the invitation. Good afternoon, everybody. Very pleased to be here.
Julia. And we're also joined by Chris Harvey, Head of Communications at Sheffield Museums Trust. Hello, Chris.
Hello. Hi, nice to see everyone.
Thank you both for joining us. So Julia, as I mentioned, is the Fundraising and Development Manager for Magic Me, which is the intergenerational arts charity in East London. She's previously worked in audience development roles for many literature charities, including the Poetry Society, and is also a writer and mentor of emerging producers. Chris, as I mentioned, Head of Communications at Sheffield Museums Trust, the charity which operates 6 of Sheffield's leading museum and heritage sites: Abbeydale Industrial Hamlet, Graves Gallery, Culham Island Museum, Millennium Gallery, Shepherd Wheel Workshop, and Weston Park Museum. Having previously worked in the marketing team at Sheffield Theatres, Chris has been with the museums for almost 20 years and oversees all aspects of the Trust's comms activity. Most recently, this has included comms around the Double the Donation, Double the Difference fundraising campaign, which has been developed in collaboration with Achates' own Director of Income Generation, Deborah Larwood. So, Julia and Chris, I'd love to just begin by asking you each in turn to just briefly take us through your initial journeys in building fundraising culture in your organisations and what forms that has primarily taken or most recently taken. Julia, I wonder, could I come to you first, please?
Certainly. I think the development of Magic Me's current fundraising strategy and activities, for me, it goes hand in hand with my moving into the role. I have done fundraising before in other roles that I've had in previous charities, but I've never been the dedicated fundraiser. I think that I was appointed into this job because of that various background. So I understand how programming and marketing and fundraising and operations and strategy all come together as part of the tapestry of an organisation's sort of holistic approach. I'm Magic Me's first full-time fundraiser in modern times. They've had part-time people on the job before. They've had people doing a bit of fundraising, a bit of something else. So I've been learning how to do the job, settling into the organisation, getting to understand the fundraising networks that exist all at the same time. Because it's new, because I'm new, there has been a license to experiment and a license to change things, and I've been very supported by the director who appointed me, and she's retired now, and we've got co-directors now. Very supported by that level of leadership, and also by our trustees. It really is a total joint effort.
That's great to hear. Thank you. And it'll be great to pick up on some of those points about kind of leadership support and board support a bit later on. Chris, could I come to you with the kind of same question to just give us a little bit of background in your experience in this area, building a culture of fundraising?
Yeah, sure. So my experience is a little bit different in that my background isn't in fundraising at all, really. The last 12, 18 months has been a real kind of new experience for me. In terms of organisationally, where we were when we started our work with Achates, we didn't have a kind of centralised fundraising team in place. So our fundraising activity took place across the organisation, led by different areas. So our directors leading on kind of major gifts and sponsorship, also leading on our work with trusts and foundations, supported by our heads of service. Our membership scheme was coordinated by our fundraising and board administrator, and we had a team of visitor fundraisers led by our visitor fundraising manager that kind of oversaw that on-site ask, and the comms team sort of supported across the piece, but in a kind of limited way, I would say at that point. So where our kind of this particular step on our journey began was early last year, when we contracted Achates to help us kind of review our approach to fundraising and where we were as an organisation, and identify the opportunities that were kind of on the horizon, and help us navigate those challenges that we were facing. So Deborah really brilliantly came in and assessed our position, and came back to us with a series of recommendations of key strands of activity that we could undertake to kind of shift where we were. From my side, really central to that was the development of a match giving campaign. That was one of the kind of key suggestions in Deborah's recommendations, and happily coincided with conversations that were going on with a potential major donor at the time. So we were really fortuitous, I think, that the stars aligned, and we had the opportunity to kind of take up Deborah's recommendation immediately and run with it. So we began a match giving campaign, 150k match giving campaign that ran from August 2025 through to the end of the year, and that was matched by a pledge from two Sheffield-based philanthropists, Graham and Sue Royal, who essentially matched every single donation that we received up to that value of 150k. So that campaign took place on site, and the double the donation message was a real asset to not only our visitor fundraising team, who are working so hard, are really focused on that ask already, but also those other wider colleagues who are engaging with our audiences, our visitors, and just really gave them a clarity of message that gave them some real confidence, which was brilliant. And then online, we developed a sort of comprehensive campaign plan, which broke down into a series of monthly themes that we were able to explore each month, looking at our impact for the people that we serve in different ways. And that's been really fundamental to us. You know, that's been the real shifts for us. We've shifted completely away from asking people to support the organization to asking people to support the difference that we make for the people we serve. And that was huge, it seems simple just reflecting on it now, but it's a huge step for us. And that is something that's having real legacy in our post-campaign comms. So since then, the campaign was a success, I should say. We raised 159k in match funds, so 309 in total, which was fantastic. And we've been building on that learning with Deborah. So one of the other recommendations was review and relaunch of our supporter scheme, which has just happened, which is fantastic. We've implemented suites of new mobile charity signage across our sites, and current work is looking at how we really embed philanthropy across all aspects of what we do. So across every single team, looking at how we foreground the philanthropy that is kind of central to every area of our work. So that's where we are at the moment.
Wow, thanks, Chris. That's brilliant. What a fantastic campaign. It's really, really great to hear about that, and kind of how interesting to hear how that campaign kind of acted as a lever for, as you say, doing that work of embedding the culture of philanthropy. And I think a really important point that you make about kind of, it seems like a simple thing, as you say, but making sure it's that impact philanthropy message, the difference that's made, that is the thing that's embedded, I think, internally and externally. That's so important. And also a reminder that, there are elements of kind of serendipity and fortuitous things that can come together to actually help build that culture and make it successful. Thank you both. That's really, really interesting. I'd like to kind of go into a few questions now. I think one that I'd like to start with, you've both kind of, I think, addressed some of this in different ways in what you've said so far. But that point about kind of recognizing that you want or you need to kind of to take some steps in thinking about what fundraising looks like in your organization and improving it, or doing that work of auditing it. So Chris, you've talked about how working with Deborah, you did some of that kind of auditing work, looking at what was happening and what needed to happen. Julia, I wonder for Magic Me, and you've talked about how this is a change, having the first full-time fundraiser. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about kind of what the impetus was in terms of recognizing there was a need for building what fundraising looked like for the organization, for putting more capacity into it, and kind of what that process has been and the rationale around it.
I think because our founder found the organization in 1989 and worked straight through, she was planning her exit very carefully from sort of 10 years out. So she had a very good oversight of what was working, what needed more attention. And I think she spent a number of years sort of organizing budgets and organizing workflows in order that the organization could afford somebody to come in and do this work specifically. I remember the initial conversations that I had with her were along the lines. She said, well, I would put a project together and I would put 3 funding bids out and 2 would come back and that would be fine. And then we'd do the project. And realizing that wasn't going to be the case anymore, that there was a requirement for additional capacity to have a lot more volume of applications to trusts and foundations, to be able to give time and space to the work that needed to be doing around diversifying our income streams to beyond trusts and foundations. I think a lot of sort of canny manoeuvring the organization into place in order that somebody like me could come in and that the work that I was doing could be sort of threaded through every aspect of the company's work.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear about, and how that kind of, yeah, that long view was taken to enable kind of that to be done,
Yes.
which is really helpful. And I think isn't always the case necessarily. It can be difficult to take that kind of, yeah, that wider view of things and understand how that has to interplay with fundraising capacity and requirements, can't it?
And in my first 6 months, we had a number of conversations like, this is the worst possible time to start work as a fundraiser. The landscape has completely changed from the experience that she had of it. So I've sort of never known anything different, really. I've never known anything but, okay, we'll try this and we'll try this and we'll try this and we'll try this. And again, going back to that capacity that I think I shared with Chris, that we know how many different facets of an organization works, and we can bring that to bear on having to solve problems really quickly and not relying on models that no longer work.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Chris, so you mentioned obviously that Sheffield Museums kind of understood that it wanted to undertake a kind of a thoroughgoing fundraising audit. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about how that decision kind of came to pass, and kind of what maybe kind of what felt like were the particular challenges or the particular stumbling blocks that led to the kind of realization that actually there's an assessment that's needed here, there's some change that's needed.
So I suppose to give a little bit of context, in Sheffield Museums was formed in 2021 from two legacy trusts, Museum Sheffield and Sheffield Industrial Museums Trust. Museum Sheffield was a free-to-enter, operated free-to-enter business model. Sheffield Industrial Museums charge for their two kind of primary sites. So as we brought those two sites together, the decision was made that the free to enter business model would be the one that applied across the new trust. But obviously with that came the recognition that we really had to capitalize on every single giving and kind of wider commercial income generation opportunity that we could. So as part of that, a few years ago, we'd established a team of visitor fundraisers, as I say, that would work front of house across sites, and would be there kind of making that ask. But I think one of the things that we had come to recognize was that the rest of the organization wasn't aligned behind that team. So they were there kind of at the cold face, engaging visitors in a really compelling way, alongside all the other teams that are working kind of in those front of house roles. But we hadn't sort of equipped them with all of the stuff that needs to align to support that activity. So that was kind of one of the catalysts, I suppose. That acknowledgement was one of the catalysts, and also there was some changes within the organisation post pandemic. As Julia said, that landscape changed really significantly after the pandemic. We did have a centralised fundraising team throughout until shortly after the pandemic, and both of the colleagues there just happened to get sort of different opportunities. They left the organization. So we were operating without that centralized team to give us that focus. So we realized, we needed to take an opportunity to look at what we were doing, look at how we could change what we were doing to align behind the teams that were making those asks on site, and think about how we foregrounded philanthropy across all those other aspects of our work.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, that's again really useful to hear how that's been approached at kind of that scale of operation, and also again how some of the external levers and environment has a role to play in just prompting these kind of assessments and reevaluations of what's working, what's not. I wonder if I could ask you both whether and I'm thinking about kind of internally now within your organisations and the rest of your team, whether there's been a fundamental kind of idea or approach or way of thinking about fundraising and philanthropy and the way that it's embedded that has really supported you in communicating the key principles of, why and what to your colleagues or to the rest of your organisation and your organisational stakeholders? I mean, Chris, you mentioned that kind of the impact philanthropy, the why piece being quite important, which I'd like to come back to. Julia, I wonder for you, has there been kind of a fundamental idea that has really driven how you've approached fundraising for your kind of internal processes?
I think the context of how we work really helps us. We're a tiny, weeny organisation, 7 members of staff all in one room. So we cannot help but overhear the day-to-day successes and activities of each other. So I know what the programme team are up to because I can hear them. They know what I'm up to because I whoop when the money comes in or curse when it doesn't. But that is reflected in the collective way that we plan as well. So anything that is to do with the year ahead, the 3 years ahead, the 10 years ahead is always done collectively with all staff members, as many board members as we can muster. And we've got a really engaged, supportive board. Stakeholder representatives from our peer organisations, our artists, our participants. It is a collective effort. We certainly are not sort of siloed away, making our own plans without relation to other people and the way that they plan. I'm going to tip the hat to the Achates income diversification framework that I used as part of the Purposeful Leadership programme. I brought that very specifically to a planning away day that we had that was focusing on income, so we could really systematically go through, right, what's our likelihood from trusts and foundations and individual donating and donors, major individual donors, trading income, service partnerships. We could use that framework as a real sort of to-do list of points that we could apply to our own organisation and come up with ideas and then develop them into a plan. So that's been a really helpful model of thinking.
Really great to hear that kind of a sort of a concrete tool that you can bring to something like that and kind of let it out and have everyone kind of buy into it. And that process of being able, and as you say, it's one of the I suppose the benefits of being that small organisation, that smaller team, that collective planning can happen. And that's not to say I know siloing can happen even in small teams, but the fact that you can have and drive that collective work underpinned by some of that modelling is really, really great to hear. Chris, I wonder for you, obviously it's a bit of a different context, but and I am going to come back again to that because I think it's so interesting, that point you made about the impact philanthropy message and how that's worked for, or you tell me how that has played a role in kind of in driving the internal message around fundraising and philanthropy and kind of bringing the entire team together around that, or kind of helping to sort of to bring people into a shared vision. Is that what has felt like it's been at the crux of it? Has there been other kind of strategies that you've used or kind of key concepts that you feel have been really helpful in kind of aligning people around the fundraising vision?
So yes is the answer. It's been really, really central. I think one of the key things that it did, shifting to talking about the difference that we make for the people we serve, is colleagues don't feel like they're asking people to give them money. We're not asking individuals to give the organisation money to support the organisation. The gift is in the support that brings for the benefit we bring to the people we welcome and work with. And I think that's been quite transformative because it's a different it's a completely different way of thinking about that ask and who you're asking for, essentially, because actually what we're asking for is on behalf of the people that we have the opportunity to welcome through our doors, to collaborate with on our projects, all of that support that we receive from through donations goes directly into that work and that benefit. And I think that was a really kind of seismic shift in our thinking. It's just an easier thing to sort of reconcile if you're not a sort of born and bred fundraiser. That concept is a far easier one for you to kind of navigate. And as I say, I'm my background isn't in fundraising, but that seemed like it's such a clear and compelling message that it's really easy to wrap your head around, and it's really easy for us to wrap our head around, but it's also really, really easy for our audiences to wrap their heads around. So that was absolutely central. So I think that has been key. I think the other things that have been equally important is thinking about how we tell those stories of impact together. So with the Double the Donation campaign, we had 5 months of content to create, particularly for kind of online. 5 months of stories we had to tell, and 5 months to make people care. And we were only able to do that thanks to the generosity of the wider teams who all worked with us to come up with that content to reflect that impact that we were having for the people we served. So we worked with our curatorial teams to talk about how local artists have been influenced by having opportunities to see the city's collection when they were young, and how they are now working with us on current exhibitions at the time. We worked with our volunteers to talk about the impact that volunteering has for them in terms of their well-being, their sense of purpose. We talked with colleagues right across the board who help bring those stories to the forefront, our community co-curators. It's been a real group effort to help develop those stories and kind of bring that storytelling together. So I think that's been really key. And because we had the concept that colleagues could really embrace in terms of our impact for people, they could see how they could feed into that really easily. So that's been absolutely fantastic. And then the other aspect is just the kind of the recognition that actually philanthropy is fundamental to our organizations, in that the collections that the museums were founded on were gifts. They were gifts from benefactors, and without that initial historic landmark act of generosity, the museums wouldn't be here. So they're really, if we're a sticker rock, philanthropy is running all the way through, and that's continued. The philanthropy. I think one of the important things that we've come to recognise is that philanthropy happens every day in the objects that donors continue to share with us, treasured memories, stories, their experiences. They gift those with such generosity, and what we do is only possible through that ongoing generosity in so many ways. And so everything began to make sense together, and that's how I think we got an authentic sense of how we could make our ask and position ourselves in terms of our relationship with philanthropy, because it's always been there.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I love that. But that's kind of it's sort of the origin story as much as it is what you're kind of still doing. And I think it's those two things you mentioned that are just fundamental to what fundraising is and does, the impact it creates for people and the stories that it tells. Impact and storytelling. And it feels like these are basic things. They should be simple to communicate, but I think you're right. So often it's not what's understood, and so when actually you can have that mindset shift to actually this is what it's about. It's about creating impact. It's about how we tell the stories of how that happens. It does feel kind of semi-revolutionary, I think, and it's exciting, and it changes the energy of not just the campaign but the organisation. So yeah, it's so brilliant to kind of hear those experiences. And although you both kind of talked, I think, really positively about how you found the experience of kind of doing this work within your organisations, I want to ask now, if I can, about kind of the challenges that have stuck out for you in kind of in building, well, building fundraising, Julia, particularly for you, and then in kind of building that fundraising culture around that as well. These might be practical, maybe systems based. I'm interested to hear about that, or they might be kind of more around sort of organizational culture and feeling and pushback. It could be involving staff, could be involving trustees, stakeholders. I'm just interested to hear about what has felt difficult, or what has kind of been more of a hurdle to overcome. Julia, could I come to you first on that one?
Certainly. I had a former colleague when I worked at the Poetry Society, and he also went from there to be a fundraiser. And we had a sort of get together before I started this job, and I was picking his brains, and he said, "You're a poet, you're used to rejection, you'll be fine as a fundraiser." So that was a personal bit of help that I had. I think we have a lot of sort of light touch contact with our trustees about the process of our fundraising. We've got two specialist fundraisers on our board. We have a fundraising committee that meets quarterly, but we're in contact in between those sort of points in the year. A lot of data flows between us about what's been tried and what's working and what's not working, and what we might tweak or attempt next. I think I haven't experienced any resistance internally at both staff, leadership level, board level, into the challenges that we are facing, because everybody's pointing in the same direction. We're all committed to the same spirit and eventual outcome. I think sometimes there can be, and I've only experienced this very lightly, is a bit of over enthusiasm about, well, how about you try this, and what about this, and you could attempt that, and I know that when you get in a room, people's trustees and everybody's impulse is to be helpful, and to be helpful by making a million suggestions, when sometimes that's not what's called for. It's just getting a bit further embedded into the strategic processes that need to go into what decisions you take and what decisions you don't take, and additional wild ideas floating around sometimes don't help. But I mean, of all the problems I've had to face in my career, that doesn't seem to be a big one. Over enthusiasm isn't something that I have to really lose sleep over.
Yeah, I think that scenario you describe is one it's certainly familiar to me, and I'm sure will be familiar to lots of fundraisers, of kind of, try this or contact this person, which, as you say, is absolutely meant in the right spirit and is helpful.
Yeah.
But it's about bringing that, I think, particularly if we're talking about boards here, bringing that the focus of the strategy, why certain avenues or prospect areas or whatever
Yeah.
are considered because of the impact match and all of that, why that's being considered and not these, and just being able to kind of ensure that doesn't drag resource or drag attention, that you don't have a leadership team who is going to kind of insist on following up every kind of suggestion that doesn't actually fit, isn't a good use of that capacity.
There's no chasing after the latest pretty butterfly. We are very structured. There's room for new ideas, of course there is, but they slot into the little box that says, here is the space for new ideas, rather than causing chaos.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And Chris, for you again, kind of that sort of the scale of the operation you've been working in, what has been challenging, again, whether that's been more practically systems based, or whether kind of more around kind of culture and understanding, what have been the kind of bigger hurdles to surmount?
I think one of the biggest challenges was inevitably resource and capacity. So, as I say, because we didn't have a centralized fundraising team at that point in place, that was a kind of an additional set of responsibility that sort of came to the comms team to help navigate, along with other colleagues around across the organisation, in terms of the development of the campaign and the development of the messaging. So having Deborah's expertise and perspective to help us pull that together was absolutely instrumental, and to be able to do so much kind of that content planning in advance was really key, because when we kind of got into the thick of it, we did find that towards the end of the campaign, where we hadn't been able to plan that far in advance, continuing to speak with colleagues and volunteers and everybody to pull that content together was hard work. And obviously we were coming up to Christmas, which was an incredibly busy period for us anyway. So the comms around Double the Donation had to sit alongside all of our other comms around our program, around our commercial activity at Christmas, which is a key moment for us. So that resourcing all of that and the planning as effectively as we possibly could, and looking at those opportunities to dovetail those messages. So looking at ways that we could feed into the campaign themes whilst talking about aspects of program that were relevant to that theme, was really key. So yeah, time and capacity were a really big challenge. And as I said before as well, that also the kind of recognition that we needed to turn the ship, and that our visitor facing teams were doing all of that kind of heavy lifting around our ask as it stood, and having to sort of mobilize as a comms team, as a wider organization to tell those stories that would support and frame those asks when people crossed our threshold. So I think that was a big challenge for us, and that's why having that really robust rationale that people could embrace was really key. And similarly, similar experiences to Julia in terms of the board. Our board were really engaged with the whole campaign, and really keen to see it move forward. But having that kind of real being able to talk about the rationale for it with real clarity and specificity was really helpful, because they knew what we were having to focus our work around. There were lots of additional ideas, as Julia says, but we had that kind of roadmap that kind of kept us moving in the direction of travel that we needed to.
Yeah, that being able to kind of present what the focus needs to be, and and harness all of that, the board's energy and kind of enthusiasm and goodwill towards that, so useful. And I'm glad you kind of mentioned that point about the board, because it is something I've wanted to ask about. And Julia, I wondered if I could. You've spoken a little bit about the board as well, and you've mentioned that you have a couple of kind of fundraising experts on your board. So I'm interested in just asking a little bit more about that. I think sometimes there can be a sense, if there's a fundraising champion or a particular advocate on the board, sometimes it means that the rest of the boards don't get so involved, or feel that the fundraising responsibility is somehow hived off, when obviously we know it needs to be plugged into the entire kind of trustee leadership and a fundamental part of governance. Julia, I wonder what your experience has been with those, with kind of that mix of particular experts and other trustees on your board, and whether that's had, I don't know, it's inflected the way that fundraising is approached, whether it feels like it does get kind of hived off a little bit to particular individuals, or whether it's kind of managed a bit more holistically than that. What's your experience?
I think sort of on a practical governance level, we have the fundraising committee that meets quarterly, and that's where the sort of hard detailed work, the campaign conversations happens, and then that is reported up to a wider board level. So the detail doesn't have to be as great, although there is a dedicated place for those discussions. But in terms of how practical assistance is working, our experts are advising us on moving into working with major donors, and those are some sort of very detailed, professionally based one-on-one conversations so are happening at that level. But also there has been a real engagement with the non-experts amongst the board level in terms of the campaigns that we're running. So we at the moment we only do the one big public facing campaign a year, and that's a big give at Christmas. And so I am coming up to working on my third one of those now, and it can plot what's happened over the time that I've been working on them, that we've all been looking at them, and it's moved from a little bit of engagement to some big individual donations to getting people's friends and family involved. So lots of 20 quid here, 50 quid there from people's relatives, because we've provided a framework for our board members to ask. And Chris, what you're saying about please will you give us money to fund this impact, rather than please will you give us money to support the organisation, that is something that we absolutely recognise. And the latest innovation that has come from one of our board members is that the organisation, she works for a big corporate finance organisation. They do a monthly fundraising focus for their staff, and she is using us as her as the charity that she's raising money for. So all her colleagues are raising money for us as well. So it's incremental steps of getting the board involved on levels according to their expertise and their capacity to give and help others give.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, I recognize those strategies and those steps that you've talked about. Absolutely. I'm interested as well, based on kind of your experience in asking about kind of what your advice or your recommendation might be to someone who is a mid-level fundraiser, say, so not someone who's on SLT, on how to successfully kind of engage leadership with building a fundraising culture, assuming that kind of it's not such an embedded part of an organization. Say, how do you, when you're in that more kind of mid-level role, what strategies do you think you can employ to kind of to start to build that culture and manage upwards, in a sense? Julia, what do you think about that one?
Managing upwards has never worked for me. I think that if you are really having to push the boat along with an organisation that doesn't, throughout all its levels, understand the importance of what you're doing and the effect that has on the ability of the organisation to carry on, I don't know if it's really the right place for you. You might be better off taking your talents to somewhere where you can be, properly appreciated, properly bedded in, properly able to make a difference. I think if you are in that situation where people are not really understanding what benefits you're bringing to the organisation, I think you have to be in control then of your own targets that you're setting yourself. If nobody is imposing a sort of KPI structure on you, you might have to look for one yourself. You might have to be aware of your own data, what you're trying, what's working, where the relationships are cooling or warming. You might have to work that out for yourself. I think I've found a tremendous amount of help in networks and training and sort of courses that exist for this particular arts admin function that I haven't seen, when I've been working in marketing or programming or anything a bit more strategic. So join them all. the best one that I find useful on a day-to-day basis is the Trust Fundraising Hub on Facebook. It seems to be quite informally convened, but it's full of people sharing their expertise, sharing their news or their successes or their bafflements. It's a really generous, helpful space to be. And as a non-expert fundraiser, when I first started, I wouldn't even claim that now, but that spirit of collegiate support has been incredibly useful. Yeah, and if you're managing up, I don't know, keep looking on Arts Jobs.
Yeah, I think that's really good kind of practical advice. I've also
Yeah,
been a long time lurker on Trust Fundraising Hub, and it is really
yeah,
helpful. And just
yeah,
that point about kind of, having a peer network that is supportive and can give you kind of learning and skills and an opportunity or a space to share if it's initially a struggle to kind of to
yeah.
build that within your organization. It's really important not to kind of feel that you're operating in that lone space.
Well, it just can sort of sense check your. Does this feel right? Does this feel right? I've asked it a few questions about things that have puzzled me, and I've got some really, really helpful, genuine, in-depth advice from total strangers. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah, yeah, completely. And Chris, for you, what's your kind of take on trying to sort of to build that kind of culture around you if you're not in that such a senior position and wanting to kind of change things or communicate that message, maybe starting with baby steps, but what would you say is important?
I think it's hard for me to say, 'cause this is, I suppose, fundraising. That kind of fundraising aspect of my role is a really new one. And with this project, with the Double the Donation project and the wider work that we've done over the last 18 months, we've been in a really fortunate position in that the board had acknowledged that need, so they were behind the work to try and move us forward from the outset. They were absolutely behind the kind of investment in securing Achates and Deborah's experience and expertise. That in itself, I think, was a really fortunate position to be in. And I think in terms of giving the board confidence about our approach, having an external party come in and make recommendations was something that they, really responded well to and welcomed. So they saw that we didn't have that expertise. We no longer have that expertise on the team, and recognized that. So they made. They absolutely endorsed that approach. So, I suppose from that, making a case for getting that expertise where you can, if you need it, is fundamental. I think if you don't know how to do it yourselves, you can waste a lot of time trying to work it out. And I think that was our kind of thinking, that, again, going back to that time and capacity that we had, we didn't have time to waste. We needed to know that the actions that we would take would put standards in good stead. So I think that kind of made sense from that perspective, and we were in a position where we were able to commission that support. So again, very fortuitous in that sense. I think in terms of sort of more widely, the thing that has worked so well as we continue to kind of grow our culture of fundraising and embracing philanthropy is just having those really robust, clear and compelling central concepts that people can grasp. I think you have to, if it's going to work for your audiences, first and foremost, it has to work for your team. So if it's too complex for the team to embrace, you're onto a loser already. So coming up with something that just has that level of clarity, I think is really really key, and that applies to any level in the organisation that you're working with. So yeah, I think that is. That's really, really important. And also being able to sort of navigate those, as we talked about before, about that enthusiasm for people wanting to shape your approach, being able to navigate it in a way that retains its focus but feels collaborative, because what you never want to do is stifle any of that enthusiasm. So that is really really important, that nobody feels that that those voices aren't being heard in those conversations. And if you aren't able to take something forward, then you kind of explain the rationale for where your focus is at that particular point. So ensuring that you retain your focus, but that sense of collaboration is there throughout.
I think that's key, isn't it? Being able to kind of be focused, be able to prioritize, particularly as you say, when capacity and resource is short, to understand where you are best placed, kind of making those or advocating for whatever it might be, or making those approaches, doing it collaboratively, as you say, looking at where you might need external support if that's an option for you. And that point you make as well about kind of, you've kind of got from all of this work, that really kind of core understanding of needing those central concepts to be understood and embraced by the team, and then carried into how you're talking to your kind of external stakeholders. And I suppose it feels like that must feel like it's a really important piece of the learning of all of this work, and something that will kind of stay as a kind of live strategy for kind of continuing to build that culture of philanthropy for staff, for trustees, for audiences, for kind of that whole stakeholder group. And finally, because we're coming up against time now, unfortunately, Julia, I wondered if I could kind of, in a similar vein, ask you what's your plans, or what are the strategies you're going to maintain, or maybe try out, to ensure that this kind of fundraising culture, this culture of philanthropy within your organisation, remains live and remains kind of the beating heart of it. What do you think you're going to be doing? Maybe it's just carry on doing what you're doing. What's your sense of it?
I think on a day-to-day level with my colleagues, I want to carry on ensuring that there's a conversation, sort of, a thread of conversation about the money I'm trying to raise and the impact that they're trying to have, that remains live. They've got plenty to be getting on with. They don't need to do my job for me, but they are I want to make sure that they're always thinking about, are there some photos that we can take here? Are there some case studies that we can make? Has there been a good quote? Are there some a new sort of statistics that we can extract from their projects that provide a really good bit of evidence for when I'm writing my next funding application? We don't in our weekly staff meetings, we don't have like vague discussions about where the state of our income. It's always very specific about this amount of money has come in for this project, this amount of money needs to be sourced for that project. It's all our sort of our governance, internal governance tools are very, very specific, so we all know exactly the state of play on what needs to happen in order that the work can happen. And I think when we're looking a bit more external, if we're advertising senior jobs or even more junior jobs, fundraising awareness and collaboration is part of all of those job descriptions, and probably trustee role descriptions as well.
Yeah.
Practical top tips.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. I think all kind of, things that are easy to implement but can make a big difference and really kind of express how that philanthropic culture is part of who you are. I'm going to have to wrap up now because of time, but thank you both so much for a really kind of brilliant discussion. I'm going, if I may, out to Jacoba. I'll just hand back to you to kind of wrap us up and tell us a bit more about what might be coming up next. So thank you both.
Thank you, Phoebe, for chairing. And I'd, of course, like to say a huge thank you to our wonderful panelists, Julia and Chris, for a really brilliant conversation. Thank you so much. As you know, here at Achates, we offer a range of services to help you get the most out of your income generation. And if you'd like to discuss how we might be able to support you, or if you'd just like to speak to a member of our team, then please do just drop us a line at info@achates.org.uk. There are also modules pertaining to this topic, particularly around how to engage your board in fundraising, available on Achates Community, which is our support and learning platform for the cultural sector, for cultural sector charity employees. Again, if you'd like more information about how you can access that, along with many other resources available on the platform, please do get in touch. And finally, just to note that our next Achates Live will be broadcast in August. There will be more details to follow on that soon, of course, so do keep an eye on your inbox. And then it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you back with us again soon. Bye for now.